Welcome back to The Explainer, everyone. Today, we're jumping straight into a seriously fascinating micro-case study on horticulture and environmental adaptation. We're looking at the actual mechanics of plant survival, specifically through the lens of a highly detailed gardening diary entry from May 19, 2026. This is part 899 of a series called Notes on Gardening by an author named Ang, and it documents this incredibly rigorous experiment with deep seedling trays. Now, if you've ever battled to keep fragile little plants alive, or if you're just a nerd for how environments interact with biology, you are definitely in the right place. We're going to unpack exactly what went wrong here, and more importantly, the strategic pivots it took to fix the whole shebang. Let's get into it. Right off the bat, Ang hits us with this core realization. Maintaining consistent moisture remains the ultimate challenge. And this isn't just some passing thought. This is literally the relentless tension of this entire deep tray experiment. When you're trying to cultivate new life in a contained little environment like that, moisture isn't just giving the plant a quick drink. It's this incredibly fragile, continuous baseline that absolutely has to be maintained. If that baseline drops, even for just a brief window, the whole system collapses. This one sentence perfectly frames the high-stakes balancing act we're dealing with. Okay, let's dive right into this. Section 1, the microclimate challenge, a severe stress test. So we are looking at a really dramatic contrast in weather patterns here. We're not talking about your steady, mild spring days. No, we're looking at wildly erratic swings. On one end of the spectrum, you've got heavy downpours, which can just physically batter young plants and completely waterlog shallow soil. But then, almost out of nowhere, the pendulum swings aggressively to the other extreme: intense afternoon sun. This crazy whiplash effect means the plants, and, well, the gardener too, can basically never settle into a predictable routine. The environment is just constantly oscillating between these two extremes, putting those delicate seedlings at serious risk. Because of these wild swings, Ang came to a pretty stark realization. The usual spot chosen for these trays was simply far too hot when that blazing afternoon sun hit. A microclimate that might have worked perfectly fine for mature plants, or even for different types of shallow trays during milder seasons, it was just completely overwhelming these young plants. The sheer thermal intensity of the afternoon sun was actively working against the deep tray system. It's basically like putting them in a tiny oven. Let's move on and see how this builds. Section 2, why the seedlings failed. A mechanical flaw. So the absolutely crucial point is right here. Ang noted, the soil simply dried out before the roots could grow deep enough to reach the water reservoir. This is just a beautifully clear explanation of a fatal mechanical flaw. Think about it. The whole point of a deep tray is usually to encourage downward root growth toward a bottom water reservoir. But when you drop a shallow-rooted infant seedling into that deep tray and then blast it with intense heat, you've just created a race against time. The blazing sun bakes that top layer of soil bone dry. The young plant is stranded. Its roots are stuck in the hot, arid top layer, while the life-saving water is sitting tantalizingly out of reach at the bottom. Just look at this tragic timeline of failure. It shows exactly how quickly a plant can be lost in this specific setup. At hour 1, that intense afternoon sun hits the tray. By hour 3, the heat has completely evaporated the moisture right out of the top layer of the soil. Move to hour 5, and those delicate, shallow roots, which are now surrounded by dry, baking earth, begin to fail. They just cannot pull up any moisture. And by hour 8, the seedling is dead. It perishes simply because its roots physically lacked the time and length to tap into that deep bottom reservoir. The environment just completely outpaced the plant's biology. Okay, so how do we fix it? Section 3, strategies for survival, actionable solutions. To save the remaining plants, Ang implemented a strategy that might seem like a total plot twist if you're somewhat new to this. The question is, why prune a struggling plant? If a seedling is barely surviving the heat, why in the world would you take a pair of shears and physically cut off its top growth? I mean, it sounds completely counterintuitive, right? You'd assume taking away leaves would just weaken an already dying plant. But, botanically speaking, it is an absolutely brilliant intervention. And this brilliantly illustrates the biological redirection of energy. See, when you snip the tips of the plant, you instantly stop its upward growth. The plant basically registers, okay, I can't go up anymore, so it reroutes its vital energy. It focuses on two things: pushing out side branches to get bushier, and crucially, driving its roots deeper into the soil. By pruning the top, Ang was physically forcing the plant to accelerate its root growth downward, sending them desperately toward that life-saving water reservoir at the bottom of the tray. It's pretty amazing when you think about it.
But pruning alone wasn't going to be enough to combat that blazing sun. Eng had to outline a really rigorous, multi-pronged intervention if those trays were going to stay in that hot location. Step 1, constant bottom watering to ensure that deep reservoir is never, ever empty. Step 2, way more frequent overhead watering to prevent that fatal topsoil dryout we just talked about. And step 3, prune the tips to force those roots down. I mean, wow. That is an incredibly labor-intensive trio of tasks just to maintain the status quo.
Let's wrap up with our final takeaways. Section 4. Adapting for future growth. Long-term conclusions.
Here, Eng writes a really hard truth that every successful gardener has to eventually face. Sheer willpower just isn't enough. The usual spot isn't sustainable for long-term growth, especially with these deeper trays. The fundamental mechanics of the deep trays, when you combine them with the hostile microclimate of that blazing sun, well, it means the old way of doing things is officially broken. Eng recognized that fighting the environment every single day with constant overhead watering and pruning, that's just a losing battle in the long run.
So it all boils down to this ultimate binary choice. Moving forward, Eng has to make a decision. On one hand, you can commit to a much stricter, highly demanding watering schedule, basically tying yourself to the garden to constantly manage the moisture levels from both the top and the bottom. Or, on the other hand, you can find a better, more sheltered area for the seedlings to thrive. You either force the current system to work through immense personal effort, or you change the parameters of the system entirely by getting those trays out of the blazing sun.
Which leaves us with this final, really vital question to reflect on. And honestly, this goes way beyond gardening. When you are facing a hostile microclimate, whether that's literally a blazing sun baking your seedlings or, a figurative difficult environment in your own projects, will you change your habits to fight it, or will you change your environment to fix it? Eng's meticulous diary entry just perfectly captures this universal tension. Thank you so much for joining me to unpack these fascinating insights today. I hope this leaves you looking at your own environments and maybe even your own houseplants with a whole new level of curiosity.